so we talked about congressional reconstruction, reconstruction through federal power. But now we need to look at it through a different lens. Now we need to look at reconstruction through a racial lens and what reconstruction meant for everybody not in the federal government, everybody not in power, and especially what it meant for people who had been fighting their whole lives to be free. Because suddenly they are free. So, pre Civil War, enslaved people have been fighting for the right to live, for the right to exist free from enslavement. And when the war is over, they are given this right. You have the right to exist, you have the right to be free from enslavement. But that doesn't mean that they're still free. And so, post Civil War, the meaning of freedom is going to change. It's no longer freedom from enslavement, it's now freedom to be equal, freedom to the rights of citizenship, freedom to civil rights, freedom to civil liberties that everybody else has. It is the concept of being free and equal. So once the 13th Amendment has passed and becomes a law, all formerly enslaved people are forever free across the United States. But again, the idea of Reconstruction by the radical Republicans, it offered this little bit of hope. For the most part, Reconstruction is a failure for the formerly enslaved. Outright racism does not go away. The belief in white supremacy does not go away. Life does not just get magically easier. And there's a fascinating book, Stony the Road. It's about Reconstruction, white supremacy, and the rise of Jim Crow. It's got some really great stuff in here. If you really want a deep dive into Reconstruction through a racial lens, I would recommend reading this. If you want a more deep dive into just history from a different lens, I also recommend Black AF History. Fascinating, fantastic book. It's hilarious. You should definitely read it. But back to Reconstruction. The enslaved people in the South and the freed people in the North had always lived with abridged rights. Now they have the right to move about independently. They don't need permission anymore. They don't have to worry about being whipped or sold or traded. So they have this chance now to move. They can move away from their enslavers. They can look for work. They can find their family who has been sold or traded away many years ago, and hopefully that they are still alive and they can find them. And so while Reconstruction does not have a huge success rate, they do have some solid advancements. And one thing they do is create the Freedmen's Bureau, which is made by the U.S. government to help formerly enslaved people adjust to life. And this Freedmen's Bureau is going to become a super important resource for people to legalize those marriages that weren't legal on plantations, to claim property, to help find each other, all of the things that you need when all of a sudden you're thrown into a new situation. People also go out in droves to learn to read and write. If you don't already know how to read and write because it was illegal to read and write as a slave, now you're going to educate yourself. If you have the ability to read and write, you can get so much further. And they start to find ways to educate themselves. Some groups pooled money together to build their own schools. They create their own churches. The AME church really takes off again here. And black men begin to vote and run for political office. And, obviously to the Southerners, that's horrifying. But there is a few shining years there where we do have a solid black Congress. And I would love to find the picture here in Stony the Road. I should have bookmarked it for you guys, but I did not, and we don't want to waste all our time, so I'll come back to that later. Again, the presidential Reconstruction makes a lot of the former activities of the Confederate States illegal. And so what do to get around the illegality of the enslaved laws? Well, they just pass new black codes, right? Why not? So The 13th Amendment says you can't be held in enslavement. That's fine. We're not going to hold you in enslavement. We'll just pass new laws that make it very difficult for Black people to not be in trouble. And they're very similar to the antebellum slave codes that we used to have. Blacks have the right to make contracts now because they're free, but the contract can now be used against them. You can use a contract to lock in a Black family, control them, and compel them to work under extremely oppressive conditions, especially if you can't read, right? Maybe you know how to sign your name, but you can't really read. You think you're getting a fair deal. You sign this contract, and it turns out you're essentially just reinforcing the fact that you are subordinate in this society. And sometimes it just puts you back into control of this person. You don't ever get to leave. There's also a code in some states that if you are a Black person and you are not working, you do not have a job, or if you quit your job, you could be arrested and imprisoned for breach of contract. So you sign this contract, you don't like the way you're being treated, you quit, you've breached your contract, now you're going to jail. They pass vagrancy laws. Again, if you're unemployed, and this is not only for Black men, women, and children that are unemployed can be taken and arrested or fined. Now, under the Black codes, you can apprentice a Black orphan or children with parents that the state has decided are unfit, which means that a white family can go take a Black child and say, oh, they're an orphan, we're going to apprentice them and raise them in our house, but essentially you're just putting them back into enslavement. Or they're taking a child and saying, oh, the parents aren't fit to raise this child, and the state government is up to decide that, and who are they going to side with? So judges typically bind the minors to white employers without any compensation to the child laborer or to the parent if they have been deemed unfit. Maryland and North Carolina did not require consent of Black parents to apprentice their children to white guardians at all. So in Maryland and North Carolina, they could just take the kid. This is kidnapping, but we're not calling it that because that would be illegal, right? We're calling it apprenticeship. Black codes disallowed Black testimony in court, except in cases involving members of their own race. They limited areas where Blacks could purchase or rent property. They imposed seditious speech fines. So if you spoke in a way that was perceived as threatening to whites, that's seditious speech, you could be fined. You can be fined for an insulting gesture or an act that a white person considers insulting. You could be fined for a violation of curfew. You're out past dark, you're getting fined. You could be fined for carrying a firearm. And even though the government tries to prevent this, most state governments deny Blacks the ability to exercise their right to vote. And so if you want to change the laws, you have to be able to vote. And Black people have been given the right to vote, but the states have made it so that it's very hard for them to exercise that right to vote. And if you cannot exercise your right to vote, you do not ever get the ability to change the laws. And if you can't change the laws, are you really free, or are you just enslaved under a different name? And that is what we are looking for, or looking at, when we are talking about Reconstruction through a racial lens, because it does not end there, but this video does.